I want you to think about the most magical place on earth. Go ahead and close your eyes. Picture this place. What is the most magical place on earth for you? And then try to picture yourself there. Just go there for a second. What is the most magical place on earth for you? Now that you thought about it, I hope I gave you enough time to think about it. Let me highlight something. And maybe you thought of Disney World, right? I don't know how many of you have been to Disney World, but as you drive into Disney World, there's a big bridge and it says the most magical place on earth. But maybe it was, a beautiful tropical beach, right? Maybe it was taking a nap on your own bed, right? Taking a nap, yeah. What was it, right? What was it? I don't know. What was it? Like, think about it. How about some of you shout out? What was it? Let me know. What is it? Costco. Wow. Wow. All right. Anybody else? Anybody else? What'd you think about the most magical place on earth? Nobody can top that, right? All right. We'll leave it at Costco. That's my nightmare. I don't know. Man, I don't know. Hey, the reason the place you thought of is magical because it's a place where you can escape all the stresses of life. You can escape all the difficulties. You can escape all the problems that overwhelm you. That's the place that you're like, oh, it's peaceful. I don't have to worry about any of my problems. I don't have to cook. I don't have to clean. I don't have to drive my kids to school, right? That's the place that you can escape. But you can only escape it for so long, right? It only lasts for like a small, short amount of time because eventually you have to go back to the real world, right? And this is what Jesus had to say about the real world. Look at this. He said this in John 16:33. In this world you will have what? Trouble. Can we all read it together? All of those online, all of those in the patio, and in here on 3. Ready? 1, 2, 3. In this world, you will have trouble. That's Jesus, the Son of God, our Lord. That's what he had to say about the real world. And just to be clear, when he says that you will have trouble, this is not the kind of trouble that Jesus is referring to. It's not the trouble of like, oh, my car wouldn't start this morning. It's not the trouble of my Wi-Fi is too slow. Right? It's not the trouble of like, man, my football team just picked up and moved to LA kind of trouble, right? Like, that is not the kind of trouble that Jesus was talking about. The kind of trouble that Jesus was talking about is the trouble that reduces everything that we spend time and energy building, and it makes it a pile of ashes. That's the kind of trouble that Jesus was talking about. The kind of trouble that leaves you with more questions than answers. The kind of trouble that causes you to question everything that you have ever believed in. The kind of trouble that doesn't allow you to summarize your faith with a cute little phrase or a bumper sticker because you're struggling, doubting, struggling with your faith after you've gone through this kind of trouble. Jesus means in this world you will have trouble. And nobody's exempt. Nobody. We all go through trials, tribulations. We all face troubles. So here's the first fill in. If you have the app or you're taking notes, write this down. Everyone has a story of loss. Everyone has a story of loss. Maybe it's the loss of a job. Maybe it's the loss of a career. You're like, man, I worked so hard. I went to school. I thought this was going to be my career. And you lost that. Maybe it's the loss of friendship, the loss of a friendship or the friendships that were attached to that friendship. Maybe it's the loss of family, just being so close to family, that closeness has been lost. Maybe it's the loss of your health. You no longer can do things that you used to because of your physical disabilities now, because of your health. Maybe it's the loss of a marriage, and that is the story of so many of us. Maybe the loss of a dream. Maybe you dreamed, I'm going to have my own biological children, and then you heard from the doctor that you couldn't. The loss of a dream, whatever your dream was. It could be the loss of a childhood. You know, you look back and you grew up in a chaotic house, and I didn't have a childhood. Maybe it's, for some of you, it's the loss of innocence. Things happen to you that should have not happened. Maybe it's the loss of opportunities. So many people over the past 2 years, they have missed out on opportunities. Graduation ceremonies, summer camps, right? We're doing the winter camp with the youth. It's been a couple of years that they haven't gone to a camp. Maybe the loss of birthday parties or vacations or weddings. No one is exempt from every has a story of loss. Nobody is exempt. The biggest loss that I have ever experienced, I have experienced many losses, but most of the losses that I have experienced were able to be recovered. But this one loss that I experienced, which was the loss of my dad, was the biggest loss in my life. And that one, together with the loss of my father-in-law, of Liz's dad. And the biggest loss, I remember when my father-in-law passed away, it dawned on me the next day that he was no longer with us. It dawned on me that he was one less person to pray for me here on earth. Because I remember he would get on his knees and he would pray for me. He would pray for you. He would pray for our ministry every single day. And it was the same thing with my dad. My dad was only a phone call away, even though he was in Brazil. I could always just call him. I could share something with him. I could ask a question. And he would always pray for me every single day as well. And when I realized that I had lost not only someone that I loved, but also someone who was interceding for me, that was very sad. That was very sad. And I know that all of us have experienced some kind of loss. And here's the next fill-in that I want you to think about this. Because regardless of what losses you have experienced in your life, it is essential that you grieve your loss. It's essential. To grieve something means not to ignore it. It means that we are acknowledging that we've lost something significant or something meaningful in our lives. It's to say, I have lost something that makes a difference. Jesus himself experienced this. So we see that when he lost his very good friend Lazarus, this is his response is summarized in 3 words found in John 11:35. Then Jesus wept. Jesus grieved the loss of his friend. Jesus was heartbroken. He was distraught. He grieved. He cried. He wept. Grief is natural. Grief is predictable. It's unavoidable. It's a response to loss, right? And most people equate grief with sadness, but grief is so much more than sadness. So much more. Grief includes all kinds of emotional response. It includes all kinds of emotions. It includes anger. It includes fear. It includes guilt. It includes resentment. It includes anxiety. And in the Bible, we read about a man named Job. Job is a good and godly man. Job was a good and godly man, and he experienced loss in many areas of his life. He experienced financial loss. He experienced the loss of his health, and he experienced the loss of his whole family. They all died. And this is what he had to say in Job chapter 6, verses 2 and 3. He says, if my misery could be weighed and my troubles put on the scales, they would outweigh all the sands of the sea. That's heavy. What Job is saying is, I'm overwhelmed. This is too much to carry. Another person in the Bible, King David, he was a king of Israel. He also experienced many losses in his life, and he began to feel resentful toward God. And so he prays and he cries out, and this is what he says. He says in Psalm 13, 1 and 2, "Oh Lord, how long will you forget me?" Have you ever felt that way? Have you ever felt like God has forgotten about you? That's how King David felt. How long will you forget me? Forever? How long will you look the other way? How long must I struggle with anguish in my soul, with sorrow in my heart every day? That was an honest prayer. And God loves these honest prayers. So let me ask you this question straightforward. Have you ever been disappointed by God? And if you have, it's okay. Have you ever felt like God let you down? It's okay. He hasn't, but I know that it feels that way. I know that this sounds like a very risky question to answer, right? But whenever we experience the loss of a dream, of the loss of a marriage, or like the loss of security, the loss of a business, the loss of something meaningful in our lives, in those moments, it's easy to feel like God is distant, that God is not watching out for us, that God is indifferent, that He's looking the other way and He's forgotten about us. It's very easy to feel that way. So it's essential that we grieve our losses. It's essential. Now, for those of you who have gone through this process, you know that the temptation for all of us is to feel hurt, is to feel pain and sadness and resentment, or whatever emotion that we are feeling. The temptation is to find ways to make whatever we are feeling go away and ignore reality and say, like, this is not happening, just ignore it, right? If I don't see it, if I don't think about it, if I ignore it, it's going to go away. But we know it doesn't. We want to escape the real world, and we want to live in this fantasy world. And we try to find ways to cope with it. We try to find ways to ignore it. And some of us, what we'll do is we'll medicate, or we will drink away our losses in order to be numb and feel no pain. Others of us, we will minimize our losses. This is very, very, like it's something that we all do. We minimize our losses and we say, like, no, it wasn't that much of a big deal. It doesn't really affect me. It doesn't really matter. And that's not true. We try to escape our losses in one way or another. But here's the deal. When we do that, when we medicate or drink away our losses, when we minimize them, when we find a way to escape from them, they don't really go away. They are there. 50 years ago, industrialists, they thought that they could bury toxic waste. They're like, if we bury this toxic waste, it's just going to go away over time. And we have since then learned that it doesn't. Over time, toxic waste just makes the problem worse. It makes the problem bigger, right? It leaks into water. It contaminates crops. It kills animals. And it's the same thing with our loss, with our grief. If we try to ignore it, if we try to hide it, it will come up in unhealthy ways. One of the ways that we can know we've buried our emotions alive is we haven't fully grieved a specific loss, and then it comes out in our response to something, and the way that we respond is disproportionate to what happened. Let me try to say that with other words, because this is important for us to understand. If we bury our grief, if we hide our grief, if we don't grieve healthy, then it's going to come out in our response, which will be disproportionate to what's happening. I'll give you a few examples. You'll come out in anger towards your spouse, towards your children. It will come out in the way that you relate to your coworkers. And they're like, what's wrong with that person, right? And you're going to hurt them, but because you are hurt, because you never dealt with the grief that you should have dealt with. That's what I'm saying. If we bury it, it's going to be worse, right? So here's the next fill in that I want you to fill in on your app or in your notes. Everyone around us will eventually feel what we fail to grieve. Your family, your friends, your coworkers, your classmates, everyone around you will eventually feel what you fail to grieve. Your future as a great employee of a company can be destroyed because it might come out when it's not the right time or in the right way. Your future as a great friend, your future as a great husband or wife, your future as a great son or daughter, it's all contingent upon the ability to deal with your emotions in a very healthy way. And, the truth about emotions is that they're messengers, right? They are meant to alert us of something so that we have to pay attention to them. It's like the check engine on your car. You might be driving and the check engine goes up and you can't ignore because the car's still working, but eventually what's going to happen? It's going to break down. So here, fill this in. It's important for us to know that everyone grieves differently. Everyone grieves differently. Some people grieve inwardly. Others are very expressive in their grieving, right? So I have my grandfather materno from like my mom's dad. He passed away when I was 7 years old, and I don't remember much, but I remember my mom was just crying and screaming on the floor, and that memory is so clear to me. And that's how she grieved. She's very expressive. Other people are grieving, and you can't even tell that they're grieving. They're not crying or anything. And you're like, are they even grieving, right? But they are, because we all grieve differently. Some people, they don't talk about it. They don't want to talk about it. That's how they grieve. Others, that's all they want to talk about, because that's the way that they grieve. Some people grieve the loss of what was. Other people, they grieve what could have been. Right? So we all grieve differently. When my dad passed away, everyone in my family grieved differently. And when I was preparing this message, I was thinking like, we all experienced the same loss. We all lost our dad, but we grieve differently. The more I thought about it, I'm like, wait, no. Even though we all lost the same dad, we didn't experience the same loss. I was thinking in my life, I lost my best friend when my dad passed away. One of my sisters, she lost a dad that she never got along with, and every encounter was filled with conflict, and she was filled with guilt and resentment. Yet one other sister, she lost the only man in her life that she could have ever trusted. And I was thinking, wow, even though we all lost the same dad, we all experienced different losses, and we all grieved differently. And that's true for all of us. So here we go. I want to give you 4 things, okay? 4 things. I know that this is a heavy subject, I understand, but it's so much needed, right? That's why I wore this sweater, just to break down a little bit, But I want to share with you 4 ways, okay? 4 ways, practical ways that we can grieve, and we can grieve in a healthy way. So here we go. Here's the first one. Pay attention to the losses in your life. Pay attention to the losses in your life. Most of the time, because we're so busy, there's so many things to get done, so much going on in our lives, we overlook the losses in our life, and we, we don't pay attention to them, right? So if you go through the loss of a job, like you might, it's just a job, I can find another one. But the real loss often is way more than the job itself. There are other jobs out there, we all know that, but the real loss could be embarrassment. You're embarrassed that you lost that job. It could be the loss of security. You found your security was in that job. Now you don't have that job. You lost the sense of security. It could be, the fear of what the future holds, right? Like, man, the economy is not doing so well. I lost my job. What does the future hold for me now? So you have to pay attention, and you have to go deeper. You're like, okay, I experienced the loss. Let me pay attention. What is the real loss that I experienced through this? If you can't identify a loss, it will eventually own you. If you can't identify what the real loss was, it will own you. So it's important. It's important. Here's another thing, number 2. So pay attention to the losses in your life. Number 2, don't try to make sense of the loss. I know that the way we are wired and the way that we're built, when we lose something, we try to make sense out of it. The first question we ask is why? Why? Right? Like, why did this happen? Why did this happen to me? Why did God allow this to happen? How can a good God allow bad things happen? Right? How can bad things happen to good people? Like we begin to ask these questions to try to make sense, and most of the time, the losses in our lives, we can't make sense at all. Losing someone to death in the prime of their life doesn't make any sense. One of our staff members just shared with us this week that her cousin, 32 years old, died of a heart attack. That doesn't make sense. Someone losing their sharp mind to Alzheimer's doesn't make sense. A parent being diagnosed and having only a couple of months to live because of ALS doesn't make sense. And even if we could explain it scientifically, like, okay, I got this down to science, I can explain it scientifically, that car accident happened because they were going at this speed and there was a stop sign that didn't stop and the other car, right? It doesn't take the pain away. Even if you were able to explain, to make sense scientifically, the pain's still the same, it's still there. So what tends to happen in those moments, we come up with little phrases, right, to kind of like help us to take the weight of the loss. So when people die, we say like, well, God needed another angel in heaven, right? When someone is experiencing like unbearable stress, we say, God doesn't give you more than you can bear, right? When someone's relationship ends in a divorce, we say, there are other fish in the sea. Right? Like, don't worry about it. You'll find somebody else. As a pastor, I have been at the deathbed of a lot of family members of yours, including some of your pets. That's that's what I do as a pastor. And I remember the very first pet that had passed away, in my mind, like, I have had pets that passed away, just go and get another one, right? So my reaction was like, it's okay, you can get another dog. And that was the worst thing that you can ever say. You're like, yeah, right? Like, yeah, right? The things that we say, like, to try to make sense out of loss. When you lose your job, oh, you always land on your feet, you'll be fine. We come up with these phrases, but they're not helpful. We unintentionally trivialize situation with little phrases, trying to make sense of what happens, but part of the grieving process is giving up control, especially if you are Jesus people and you say like, Jesus, I cannot understand, but I know that you are in control. And I love the song that we sang this morning earlier that says, what the enemy meant for evil, I know, Jesus, that you will turn it for good. Do you believe that in your life? Think about things that have happened, losses that you have experienced that were due to other people, like that other people caused in your life or the enemy caused in your life. And you can turn right to them and say, I have no idea why this happened. It doesn't make sense, but I tell you this, what you meant for evil, Jesus is turning for good right now in this moment. So here's number 3. Write this down. Don't rush the grieving process. Don't rush the grieving process. When my dad passed away, I felt so at peace. One reason I felt at peace is because he was really suffering the last few days of his life. And the other reason why I felt at peace is because I knew his faith with Jesus, and I knew that he had gone to be with the Lord immediately. And I had the opportunity to do his memorial service and everything, and I flew to Brazil, spent a week with my mom, came back, and got back to ministry, and life goes on. Well, one day, as we were all, Liz used to come to the house to eat lunch, and the boys were off. So we're all sitting on the table, and I just started weeping out of nowhere. And I felt so embarrassed. And I look at them, and they're like, what's happening with Daddy? And I'm just crying because I hadn't taken the time to grieve. I thought, like, I'm good. Like, I was joyful, but he wasn't. So don't rush the grieving process. Experts say that it takes about 18 to 24 months before you start to heal. Now, lots of people fall into the trap of like just rushing through the grieving process like I did, right? And they want to get over it. But loss is not something you get over it. It's something you get through, right? And even though experts say that, it usually takes 18 to 24 months to begin to heal, I want you to think about this. And I can think of my mother-in-law and I can think of my mom, right? But think about this. If someone loses their spouse, okay, and some of you here have lost your spouse, the hardest part is not the funeral. The hardest part is, like the funeral becomes after a while just a blur. You can't remember who was there. You can't remember what was said, right? Like you can't remember most of the conversations that happened because you were kind of numb still. You're trying to process everything. But for a spouse, the grieving process is so much bigger than just planning the funeral and choosing the cemetery and the headstone, and all of that is part of it. But think about this. The spouse needs now to call Social Security. The spouse needs now to check annuity. Was there any life insurance, right? How about property deeds? I know that when my dad passed away, nothing was done. So my mom was like, I have no idea. So all of us have to jump in, and it's been 2 years, and we're still dealing with stuff like that. And when you think that you've gone through this whole process, that's when the cards stop coming and the phone call stop coming. And when you need the most, that's when people forget because time passed by. So our grief really be healed, and time doesn't heal it. Time just creates distance between the event and where you are, right? But it's important not to rush it. And here's the last one, and this is my favorite one. Never lose hope. Never lose hope. So if you're here today and you are grieving a loss, I want you to know, don't lose hope. Don't lose hope. It's going to get better. It's a promise, not from me, from Jesus, from the Bible. One of the many themes that we see surface over and over in scriptures with God is that there is suffering, right? There is death. There is burial. But all of those things, suffering, pain, death, burial, they all lead to one thing, which is the resurrection, right? So when something dies, it comes back alive in Jesus. And that's the hope that we have. The hope in one person. His name is Jesus. We die to the old, but we are resurrected into something new, into something different. So this is what Jesus, John 16, he says, in this world you will have trouble. I only talked to you about the first half of this verse, but can we all read the second half here in the room, online, and in the patio? Ready? But take heart, I have overcome the world. That's your promise of hope. That's it right there. But take heart. Because of me, Jesus says, you can have peace in the midst of chaos. You can have joy in the midst of sorrow. You can have hope in the midst of loss. And there's a form of art that exists, and this is actually what it's called. It's called trash art, and here's a picture of it. And trash art is exactly what it sounds like. It's composed from trash, and it's composed from things that have been thrown away, and they put it together, and they make it into a beautiful piece of art, like the one on the picture. And God is a specialist in trash art. He can get all our trash, get all our pain. He can get all our suffering. He can get all our grieving, all our loss. Everything that we would discard as good, he can get that. He can put it together and make something beautiful out of those things. That's the God that we serve. I want to invite the band to come up, and I want to finish by telling you this. God wants to make something meaningful in your life from the things that you want to throw away. So some of you need to hear that this morning. God is taking some things that you don't want upon your lives but have come upon you. He wants to take those things and he wants to make something new. He wants to bring it out of death into resurrection, make something beautiful. So what he wants to do is he wants to take the ashes of our lives and he wants to make something beautiful. my story of grief, your story of grief, our story of grief has a lot of potential to become a story of unresolved anger, a story of hatred, a story of resentment, a story of bitterness, a story of hurt. Or, in Jesus, when you give it up to Him, it has the potential to become a story of hope, a story of healing, and a story of resurrection, of new life. And so Jesus comes and He says, yes, true, in this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. Jesus has overcome the world. Jesus has overcome death. And whatever happens in this world, Jesus is saying, I'm going to make it all new. I'm going to resurrect it into something new. And so Jesus is turning graves into gardens. Jesus is turning mourning into dancing. Jesus is turning ashes into beauty. Jesus is turning shame into glory. Do you believe in Jesus? Do you love Him? Will you stand with us? Will you sing with joy? Will you sing with hope?
Go ahead, Stan.
Oh, I searched the world, but it couldn't fill me. Man's empty praise, treasures that fade are never enough. Then you came along and put me back together. And every desire is now satisfied here in love. Oh, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing, oh, nothing is better than you. I know it's true. Oh, I'm not afraid to show you my weakness, my failures and flaws. Lord, you see them all, and you still call me friend. 'Cause the God of the mountain is the God of the valley. There's not a place your mercy and grace won't find me again. Oh, there's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing, oh, better than you, Lord. There's nothing. Nothing is better than you. Oh, sing this out, there's nothing. Oh, there's nothing, oh, better than you, Lord. There's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing, oh, nothing is better than you. Here's our promise. You turn mourning to dancing. You give beauty for ashes, yeah. You turn shame into glory. You're the only one who can. You turn mourning. You turn mourning to dancing, yeah. Beauty for ashes. You turn shame into glory. You're the only one who turn grace. You turn grace into garden. You turn bones into armies. You turn seas into highways. You're the only one who can. You're the only one who can. Oh, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing, no, better than my Jesus. There's nothing, yeah, nothing is better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing, yeah, better than you. There's nothing, oh, nothing is better than you. Oh, you turn grace, hey, you turn grace into garden. You turn bones into army. You turn seas into highways. You're the only one who can. You turn graves into garden. Oh, you turn bones into armies. Oh, you turn seas into highways. You're the only one who can. You're the only one who can. You're the only one who can. Oh, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you. There's nothing, oh, nothing is better than you. You turn mourning to dancing. You turn mourning to dancing. You give beauty for ashes, yeah. You turn shame into glory. You're the only one who can. You turn mourning to dancing. You give beauty for ashes. You turn shame into glory. You're the only one who can. You're the only one who can. You're the only one who can. Last time. There's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing, nothing is better than you. Last time, sing this out. Oh, there's nothing
Better than you, there's nothing. Better than you, Lord, there's nothing.
nothing is better than you.
I think that some of you need prayer today. Some of you have experienced the loss of a marriage, the loss of a loved one. And I want you to meet Grace. Grace is here today to pray for you. So I don't want you to leave without being prayed for. Maybe you're like, I would like to, but come, okay? So this pew, so you can come, you can sit down and have Grace pray for you. She's been praying for you this week, and she's here to pray for you in person. So don't leave without receiving prayer if the Lord puts it in your hearts, all right? For those of you who haven't met me yet, I would love to meet you at 5 and 5. Stay for a little bit, everybody. We do have snacks for you. We are done being the church in here. Let's go be the church out there. Come get more.